Hello everybody. Welcome back to this channel and welcome back to this exclusive series on Snowflake native applications. The topic for today is data security. Implementation of data security is at the core of the native application framework. There are two perspectives. The first is a provider perspective and the second one is a consumer perspective. Now for this video, we are going to limit ourselves to the provider perspective. Consumer perspective is something which we are going to look at in the very next video. To make things simple for you to understand, I've put together a slide wherein I have highlighted a few of the ways in which data security can be implemented. Great, let's review the slide together. On my screen, you see three different ways in which you can share the data between your provider account and your consumer account. Now, before I move any further, I'm assuming that you have already reviewed the previous videos and you have a fair understanding of what a provider account is made up of, what is the purpose of a consumer account, what is the purpose of an application package, and how an application package is made. What are the different artifacts of an application package, and what is the difference between an application package and your application. With that assumption, let's move ahead. Let's look at the first way in which you can share the data. So the first way talks about creating the dataset within the shared schema. Now, what is the difference between your shared schema and the application schema? Shared schema hosts the data which is supposed to be shared from the provider account to the consumer account, whereas the application schema is a container wherein you store your application business logic, maybe the different the Streamlit files and the setup files that you write. Now, a very typical way of implementing number one is creating a database object, a table object to be precise, on your shared schema, and then creating a secured view on top of that particular database object and sharing the view from the provider to the consumer. Now, the only way you can share a data set or a data asset within the native application framework from one account to the other account is by creating a secure view. You cannot share a table object directly. Let's look at the number two way. The second way talks about hosting the data in a different database. Now it's very synonymous to number one. The only difference is data is not hosted directly on the shared schema. Data is hosted in another database. What you do is you create a view in the shared schema pointing to the other database, and then you share this particular view which you have just created on your shared schema with your consumer account. So it's actually a two-step process. First, you create a view on your shared schema pointing to other database, and then you share this particular view which you just created on your shared schema with your application. Let's look at the third way. The third way is a very simple way. The data is not there in the provider account itself. The object creation and the data loading is all a part of your setup script. So the moment you install your application, the setup script installs the data on the application. It creates the database object on the application schema, and then it loads the data within the application in that particular object of the application schema. Now, this is a very typical use case of using static data. Whenever an application requires some static data, this is the way you generally implement it. You make it a part of your setup itself. However, if your application needs to be backed up by a reference data which is continuously changing in the provider account, the way you do it is follow number one or number two. Okay. There's a bunch of questions which I have mentioned on the right hand side. So a very common question which I often get from my customers, that once the data is shared, once the provider account has already shared the data with the consumer account, can the consumer view that particular data? The answer is yes or no. You as a provider can control that behavior. If you think that the dataset which the provider has shared with the consumer is necessary for the consumer to view it during the course of application usage, yes, you can make it happen. You can grant permission to the application role to view data or select the data from that particular data set. And if you think the consumer doesn't need to view it, the data which is shared with the application is exclusive to the application code, application logic, and the consumer need not see it, you can even control that. How do you do that? We will see that in action once we hit VS Code. So we are on VS Code. Let's review the setup file for today. Before we do that, I think it will be better if we can start off where we left on the previous lecture. So that was on setup underscore v1. So in that particular setup file, we created a very basic native application. It had a single stored procedure and it was written in SQL. In this particular setup, I'm going to introduce you to a Python stored procedure, a very simple stored procedure, which is called add2. It's a function actually, wherein we are taking a number as an input and we are adding 2 to that. Fantastic. I think you're already familiar with these steps: creating a role called app public, a schema called core, applying the necessary privileges, and then finally applying the necessary privileges to the function that we just created. Right. What next? We're going to implement all the 3 steps that we discussed on our slide deck. If I go to the slide deck, let's try to map each of the steps with our code. So here we are creating a table within the application itself. So that is actually number 3. So we are creating a schema called app shared schema. We are creating a table which we are naming it as account table created from setup. We are providing the data, or we are ingesting the data within the setup script itself. And once we are done, we are applying the necessary privileges to this particular role. What next? I think we are talking about creating a table from a stored procedure from within this application package. So this is something which we will be looking at, and this is number 1. Yep. So if you look at number 1, we are going to create a table called accounts as a prerequisite. So before we install this application, we have to create a table called accounts. We have to put some data into that, and from that account table, we are going to create a view. We are going to create a view. We are going to name that view account view created from package. Yeah. And once the view is created onto the package, we're going to provide the necessary privileges to that particular view. The last one is the most interesting one, wherein we are creating a view from this particular database, DemoDB. So what we have done is we have, if I refer back to this particular diagram, we have a DemoDB considered as another DB. We have created a table called customer database over there. So as a part of this particular step, what we are doing is we're creating a view on top of the DemoDB table, and during the process of application installation, we are creating another view pointed to this view in the application package, and then finally we are giving the right privileges. Now we will see all that in action. Let's head over to our Snow site. So at this point of time, what do we have on the object repository? We don't have anything. So the first task is to create our application. Application is already dropped. We're going to create the application. Then we are going to use the application. We're going to create a schema called stage content. we're going to create a schema called shared content. We're going to create a table called accounts within the shared content, because this is the account table which will be shared to the consumer. We're going to insert some data, and at this point of time we are actually talking about implementation of the third pattern, which is we are now implementing the first pattern, because the third pattern is a part of the script, is a part of the setup script which is already taken care. Once the account table is created, we are going to we are going to apply the necessary privileges. We're going to grant a select privilege to the package. And finally, we're going to create a stage, because that is where we will have to upload all our application code, and we will see the stage. Let's see. If I refresh my object browser, I see a package. I see a stage which is empty right now. And I see shared content schema wherein I see a table called accounts. Fantastic. Let's go ahead and upload the necessary files onto the stage. Go to my stage, and I'm going to upload. The first thing that I'm going to upload is my version 2 setup, and this is going to go straight into my scripts folder. At this point of time, I'm going to upload manifest and my readme, and this is going to go at my root position. I have to enable directory, and if I refresh this, what do I see? Manifest, readme, and the scripts. We are all set to create the application right now. Are we? I don't think so. Before I create the application, there's one more thing that we will have to do. So if you look at the left hand side, there's a table called DemoDB which has a table called customer data. So what we have to do is, DemoDB is actually here. From DemoDB, we have to create a view within our shared schema. That's what we're going to do now. We're going to create a view in our shared content schema from DemoDB, and we are going to name it customer view created from DemoDB. Let's execute this. Now, point to note, we are implementing the pattern wherein data is outside of the application package, and because the data is hosted outside of the application package, the application package need to have a reference usage to that external database. That's what we are going to do, grant reference usage on this particular table to the application package. Now, you might be very curious, where did I get this command from? This is all there in the documentation. I'm not going to go very deep into the documentation today. I'll leave it for you to explore, and I'll ensure that I'll put this particular link on the description box. The next thing is to grant usage, and then finally grant select on the view that I just created. At this point of time, we are all set to create the application. Application is finally created. Let's look at the application. At this point of time, I'm assuming the application will have two views and a table. If I go to the core schema, I see a function called add2. Fantastic. If I go to app shared data, I will see a table called account table created from setup. If you remember, there was a setup script wherein I created this table, account table created from setup, right from the script. and there was no data transfer that happened from the application to the consumer. If I go to views, I'll see two views. The first view is the account view created from the application package, and there's another customer view created from the package. This customer view was actually created by a two-step process from DemoDB to the package and from the package to the application. However, the first view was created by a one-step process because the data was already there within the application package, right? So we have now implemented all the three steps successfully, all the three patterns that we just discussed in our presentation successfully. Let's go ahead and test it out a little bit. We can call add to. Does it work? No, it doesn't work because I have changed the name of the application. So if you go and put it out here, you will see that the function response, I've put 1. If I put, let's say 99, it adds to that and gives me 101. Fantastic. All set. Now, there was a question on the slide. Once the data is shared to the application, can the consumer actually view it? At this point of time, the consumer is able to view it because if you click this, yes, the consumer can view it. If you click the other views, even then the consumer can view it. Now, what do I do in a situation when I as a provider do not want the consumer to view it? Let's see that. Let's go back to VS Code again. Now, for that particular purpose, I have created, I'm not going to save it. Let's look at version 3. Now, for that particular purpose, what I've done is I've created a fresh setup wherein I am creating this particular table called accounts, account table created from setup. So this is all created within the setup. And I've created another stored procedure, which I've named it as read data. Okay. Now this stored procedure is going to read the data from this account table and show it to you. However, show it to the consumer. However, the consumer will not have the permission to query this particular table. Now, at this point of time, the consumer can query this particular table, right? If I can do a preview, that very well means the consumer can query this table. Select star from our first app. Dot app share data dot accounts from setup. Yep. The consumer can see this particular table, but I don't want the consumer to do that. For that, what I've done is I've highlighted a change, a very, very significant change. I'm going to grant usage to the role on this particular table. However, I'm not going to grant select. This is how you control the behavior at the consumer end. So to repeat, I'm granting usage on the schema. However, I'm not granting select on the table. The result is this particular stored procedure can read the content from this particular table. However, the consumer will never be able to fire a select query because to the consumer, this particular table will be non-existent. He will not be able to see the table at all. If you look at this particular stored procedure, what it is doing is it is reading the name of the current database and it is formulating this particular select statement wherein it is going to read from Snowflake app. Now I think this is going to break because in the previous line you would have seen that we have changed the name of our application, which is Snowflake app, our Snowflake app. Rather, let me put it this way. I'm going to make it a variable, which is actually the name of your database, right? So that way we need not change this time and again. The name of your schema is app shared schema. This is not dynamic. This is something which is static, which is there in your setup script as well. So there's no point making this a variable, and I think I'm good. So at this point of time, it is going to return the data from this particular table only through this store procedure and nothing else. Let's go ahead and execute this. On the manifest file, I'm going to make it 3. And let me start going back to my app stage. I will have to upload a modified manifest file. I will have to upload the new setup script. All set. Let us go ahead and drop our first app and recreate our first app. I think the manifest file is still an incorrect one. Maybe the upload was not successful. Ah, I get it. So there's a new folder called script.created by mistake. I'm going to remove it, and within scripts it's still 2. So I will be uploading the third one. Yeah. Right. Now, I need not delete 2, let it be there, because the manifest is always going to look for version 3. Fantastic. Let me drop the application. Let me try to recreate the application. And at this point of time, I think it should be done quick fast. Fantastic. Let's go ahead and see our first app. Under core, I see a function, add to number, a procedure called read data. However, if you look at app shared data, you don't see the accounts view at all, or rather the account table at all. Now, I was supposed to see an account table. I created an account table from setup, but I don't see it because I haven't given the select right to the consumer. Fantastic, isn't it? This is exactly what native app framework offers. It's a very versatile framework. It allows you to control your permissions of the data that you want to share, the data that you want to show to your consumer, the data you want to share with your consumer. You can control the way how do you want to show it, how do you want to share it. Now, there's a function that we created called read data. Let's go ahead and execute read data. Or there's a store procedure we created called read data. Let's go ahead and execute read data, because read data is supposed to have read privileges on the table, nobody else. Did we miss anything? Yes. Fantastic. You see, I was able to read data. Store procedure was able to read all the records from that particular table and give it to you in These are all Snowpark data frames, right? So if you're new to Snowpark, just go ahead and explore Snowpark. You will understand these are every row. So this is the first row, this is the second row, this is the third row, and this is the fourth row. So we saw how you can control visibility of the data that you share with your consumer. You can allow your application objects, application business logic to refer to the static data. However, as a consumer, you can, as a provider, you can restrict your consumer on how he or she can query that particular table. Great. We're at the last part of this particular video, wherein we're going to add a version, we're going to add a patch, and we will see how do we perform upgrading. If I go over to my Snow site again, I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to add a version, I'm going to add a patch, and I'm going to create the application from the version and the patch which I just mentioned. If I go to my application, what do I see? I see a previous version of the application already existing. Fine. If I go to packages, I see the package. If I go to the package, I do not see any versions created out of it, because as I said, while we are debugging, we need not create a version of the package. That's not one of the mandatory steps. So far, we have been creating the application directly from the stage. But now is the time for us to understand how do we create a version and a patch. First thing, we are going to use this application or use this application package. Then we are going to alter the application package by adding a version. Let's go ahead and add a version. Let's go to the application and let's see what is the condition right now. Yes, the version has been added. Now we want to add a patch. So from a software engineering perspective, a version is created whenever there is a major change, and a patch is something for a small change. So I am now going to add a patch. Now if you see, I did not mention the patch number. That means it's going to increment the patch number by default. Right now it is 1. At this point of time, if I go ahead and refresh it again, you see there are patches. So there's a patch number 0, which is by default, which is created. And now that I created an explicit patch, it is marked as 1. What is the next step? I'm going to create an application. This particular name is from a different application. So I'm going to create an application, our first app, from application package using version 1, right? So let me go ahead and drop the application which is already existing. And if I mention this, I could have mentioned patch as well, but right now if I do not mention the patch number, that means the latest patch number will be picked up by the system by default. Now I'm going to create our application again from the version. And yes, we are there. So now if you go here, I have patch number 1. If I go back to my app screen, and I can see the application has already been created. So we created an application version number, we created a patch, and we created an application from the latest patch. If I go to show applications, you can see there's an application called Snowflake. This is the basic. This is a default one that's get installed whenever you create a trial account. We have our application called, our first application is a default application. I have version 1, I have patch 1. Now it could have been possible that I create another installation with patch number 0, possible, or I could have created another patch called P2, and I could have done it. So if you want to see that, let's do that. Let's see that. So I'm going to drop the application. I do have a version already, right? So I have version V1, which is having 2 patches. Let's go ahead and create another patch. So I can see that I have 3 patches. Fantastic. However, let's try to create the application from the previous patch. Let's say patch 2. So I'm going to ignore the patch 3 and I'm going to use patch 2. If I do a show applications, you see it is again created from patch 2. So that is how you manage your application version and application patches. If you do not mention your patch number, it always picks up the latest patch. Lovely. Let's try to look at the application once more. I don't have app share data. I have core functions and the stored procedure. If I execute this, I get an output, and if I execute read data again, I should be able to see all the 4 records. Do I? Yeah, we're good. Fantastic. This brings us to the end of our video on secure data sharing. We looked at the different possibilities by which you can secure your data sharing between your provider and your consumer. At this point of time, if you think this video was really helpful, it has helped you in your journey of building a native application step by step, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. It will be really helpful if you can leave a comment in the comment section saying that it was helpful, and this will be a great motivation for me to come back to you with many more interesting videos on Snowflake native applications. Thank you very much. Until we see you in the next lecture.